Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
So today we're focusing on a significant event down in Australian politics. A major party just launched its campaign.
That's right. And we've got the full transcript of the main speech from that launch.
Exactly. So our mission really is to kind of unpack that, pull out the key policies, figure out the core message they're sending.
What are they actually promising the Australian people? What's the vision based on this speech?
It's their perspective, obviously, laying out what they say they've done over the last 3 years and, what's next.
Okay, so where do they start? Looking back.
Yeah, kicks off with a review of the past 3 years, and unsurprisingly, perhaps a big focus on the economy.
Right. And what's the story they're telling there?
Well, the narrative is very much one of a turnaround. They're claiming quite a shift in the numbers.
Like what specifically?
Okay, so they point to inflation dropping, said it was over 6%, now down to 2.4%, and still falling, apparently.
Okay, that would be a significant drop if those numbers hold. What else?
Real wages, they're claiming 5 straight quarters of growth there. And interest rates, after all those hikes, they say they're now starting to fall.
So, painting a picture of stabilization, maybe improvement.
Seems like it. And then the big number, jobs. Over 1 million jobs created since the last election. They're saying that's the most in any single term since Federation.
Wow, okay. That's a pretty bold claim. Over 1 million.
It is. And you can see how that sets the stage, right? Claiming economic success to then build support for future plans.
Makes sense. Did they go beyond those headline figures?
Yeah.
Mention specific policies from the last term?
Oh, yeah, definitely. They listed quite a few things. Remember the same job, same pay law for casual workers?
Yes. Aimed at pay parity between casual and permanent
Yeah.
staff doing the same work.
Exactly. That got to mention. Also, more flexibility for working from home and that right to disconnect policy.
That's quite a modern workplace focus, isn't it?
Right.
Adapting to how work is changing.
Seems that way. And there was a lot of emphasis on women's economic participation, too.
Oh, really? What did they claim there?
Record high participation rates, they said, and the gender pay gap being at a historic low.
Okay, those are significant markers, if accurate. Links into social policy, too, I imagine.
Absolutely. They talked about expanding paid parental leave now, including superannuation, which is a big step.
Right, adding super to PPL has been discussed for a while.
And also introducing 10 days of paid family and domestic violence leave.
That's another major social policy change with, pretty clear economic impacts for individuals and businesses.
Definitely. And they tied this into lowering the cost of childcare and boosting pay for early childhood educators.
So supporting families and the care economy, a common theme.
Mm-hmm. And healthcare, always central. They spoke about making progress on restoring bulk billing.
Always a key issue. What else on health?
The Medicare urgent care clinics, they said 87 are open now, over 1.3 million visits apparently, and a third of those were kids under 15.
So positioning those clinics as easing pressure on hospitals.
Seems to be the idea. And they're promising another 50 of them.
Okay. What about other areas like aged care or education?
Yep, touched on those. Claimed a historic pay rise for aged care workers, and said a registered nurse is present in facilities 99% of the time now.
Highlighting improvements in staffing and conditions in aged care.
Right. And for schools, they referenced the Gonski Review.
The school funding review.
Yeah. Mentioned signing agreements with states and territories for, quote, better and fairer school funding.
So education funding is part of their claimed achievements.
And also vocational education. Recentering public teacher fee, they called it, offering free training or retraining for, I think it was 600,000 Australians.
Good focus on skills there. Important for the economy.
Definitely. And then just briefly a mention of sort of restoring Australia's leadership role internationally and engaging with the world again.
Okay, so that's the look back. Quite a list of claimed achievements across economy, social policy, health, education.
Yeah, setting the scene. Now, let's pivot to the future plans outlined in the speech. The big theme seems to be building.
Building, as in construction.
Well, yes, partly. The phrase they used repeatedly was building new homes, new infrastructure, new energy.
Okay, so a forward-looking infrastructure and development message.
Exactly. And they framed it all around Australian values, rewarding hard work, opportunity, fairness, aspiration, projecting momentum.
Right. So where does the building start? What's the first big promise?
Housing. A really major focus on homeownership. They announced this new 5% deposit plan for first home buyers.
Okay. Reducing the deposit hurdle. How does that work?
It's available up to the average house price in each city or region, apparently, and the government would cover the mortgage insurance.
That LMI cost can be substantial, so that's a key detail.
It is. And they made a point of saying, look, the median home price is around $820,000 now, a 5% deposit, about $41,000. They claim you haven't been able to buy the median home with that little down since 2002.
So highlighting how tough it's become and positioning this as a direct response.
Precisely. And beyond the deposit scheme, there's more on housing supply.
Like what?
A $10 billion investment commitment. The goal is to build 100,000 new homes specifically reserved for first home buyers.
Wow, $10 billion just for first home buyer housing stock. That's significant.
Yeah. And the broader aim, they state, is 1.2 million new homes built by the end of the decade.
Ambitious target. How do they propose getting there?
Well, the speech mentioned a few things. Boosting trades training, more public and affordable housing, remote housing initiatives, and supporting build-to-rent projects.
Okay, so acknowledging it needs a multi-pronged approach, skills, public investment, different housing models.
Seems like it. Now, moving away from building itself, but related to household budgets, cost of living, obviously a huge issue.
Always is. What measures did they announce there?
One that jumped out was an immediate $1,000 tax deduction for work expenses.
A flat deduction. How does that work?
Yeah, seems like an instant deduction. They're framing it as helping low and middle income earners, part-timers, people working from home who maybe don't track every little expense right now.
So a simplification measure, potentially?
Kind of. But they did stress if your actual expenses are higher than $1,000, you can still claim the full amount the usual way.
Okay, so it's like a baseline minimum deduction you can take easily.
That seems to be the idea. And then, sticking with tax,
More tax cuts.
they reiterated the tax cuts for, they say, all 14 million taxpayers, claiming an average of $2,500 back per year per taxpayer and framed as permanent.
Right, and I bet they contrasted that with their opponents.
Oh, absolutely. Drew a very sharp contrast, accusing the opposition of planning, quote, permanent income tax increases, clearly setting up a battle line there.
Tax is always a key differentiator.
Yeah.
What else on cost of living?
Well, linking back to earlier points, they mentioned making free TEF-E permanent and locking in a 3-day guarantee for early education, calling it the next step towards universal childcare.
So education and childcare positioned as cost of living relief as well.
Yeah. And energy bills, a promise to cut power bills by providing a 30% discount off the cost of home batteries.
Interesting. Focusing on battery uptake to manage energy costs.
And finishing the NBN rollout with fiber and keeping it in public hands, presented as, essential infrastructure.
And the commitment to Medicare, you mentioned the urgent care clinics. Anything else there?
They described it as the biggest investment in bulk billing ever. Plus, more hospital funding, focus on women's health, new mental health centers, more GPs, nurses, midwives, the whole package.
Reinforcing that core commitment to Medicare.
Definitely. And they also rattled off a list of existing measures they say are already helping.
Reminding people what's already in place.
Exactly. Things like cheaper childcare for over 1 million families, the energy bill relief payments,
$150 household payments, yeah.
reducing student debt slightly, cracking down on supermarket prices, or claiming to lowering medicine costs on the PBS.
Right, the $25 cap and $7.70 for concession card holders frozen.
Yeah. And increased rent assistance, expanding the single parenting payment, just reinforcing that they're acting on cost of living across the board.
Okay, quite a comprehensive list on cost of living and social support.
Yeah.
What about the big picture stuff like climate and energy policy?
Yep, covered that too. Reaffirmed the existing targets, 43% emissions reduction by 2030, net zero by 2050.
And the strategy to get there.
Emphasis on renewables, but backed by gas, hydro, and batteries. Framing it as not just environmental, but also about energy security and, interestingly, economic sovereignty, enabling more local manufacturing.
Linking the energy transition to industrial policy.
Seems so. And they went pretty hard against the opposition's nuclear energy proposal.
Oh, yeah. What was their line of attack?
Cost, mainly. Quoted a figure of $600 billion to taxpayers, claimed it would kill off renewable projects, scare off investment, and actually increase power bills.
So positioning nuclear as economically irresponsible and detrimental to the renewable sector.
Pretty much. They also claim the private sector wouldn't invest in it anyway, a very strong rejection of that path.
Clear battle lines drawn on energy policy then.
Absolutely. Then, just briefly, on defense and foreign relations, the main message was simply that Australia will make its own calls based on its own national interests.
Standard positioning there.
Yeah. And finally, they wrapped up by talking about social values, framing their policies as reflecting the Australian fair go.
How so?
By arguing Australia often finds its own way, distinct from other countries, they pointed to things like wage setting, handling student debt differently, and especially the health system, Medicare, as examples of Australia forging its own path.
Appealing to national identity and that sense of Australian exceptionalism, perhaps.
Kind of felt like that, connecting policies back to fundamental values.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground from just one speech transcript.
We have. So if we try and sort of summarize the key themes, what stands out?
Well, certainly that economic management piece. Claiming success, promising stability, future growth. That was front and center.
Yeah. And then the strong focus on social support systems, right? Healthcare through Medicare, education funding, TFE, childcare. Lots of commitments there.
Definitely. Bolstering those universal services. And then looking forward, the big building agenda.
Homes, energy, infrastructure.
Exactly. Particularly the focus on housing affordability with those specific first home buyer initiatives and the clear path outlined for the energy transition, contrasting strongly with the nuclear alternative.
So it's a platform trying to cover, immediate pressures like cost of living, but also those big long-term challenges like housing and climate.
That seems to be the narrative, yes.
Uh,
A story of past achievements, they claim, leading into a future vision built on these specific policies.
right. So for everyone listening to this deep dive, as you hear about these proposed policies, this review of the last few years, just from this one perspective, remember.
This one-size pitch.
Exactly. What parts of it really stand out to you? What resonates or maybe raises more questions? Thinking about the details, the potential impacts for Australia.
Yeah, what specifics do you want to know more about? And what other perspectives might be needed to get the full picture?
Good questions. It's always worth digging deeper, seeking out different views to form your own informed opinion. That's really what these deep dives are all about, isn't it?
Absolutely. Food for thought.